They laughed when the lawyer said $1. It was the sound of people who believed they'd won, the sound that always reminded me I was the mistake in the family portrait. But I didn't come for the money. I came to watch them break. My grandfather left me 3 words: "She knows why." And when the lawyer finally asked me the only question that mattered, their laughter died in their throats. My name is Emma Hayes, and this is the story of how I bought the truth for $1. Let me take you back to where it started, to the funeral, to the reading of the will, to the moment my family made their fatal mistake. I stood at the back of St. Jude's funeral home like I was crashing a board meeting I'd been explicitly fired from 15 years ago. The Pennsylvania sky hung low and gray, promising freezing rain, but never quite delivering, just enough to keep you on edge. It was fitting. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and something else underneath: dry cleaning chemicals and old money. The kind of money that gets laundered through charity galas and shell corporations. The kind of money that makes people do terrible things. I shook the rain off my coat. No one offered to take it. No one offered a program. The usher, a young man who looked like he'd been polished in a rock tumbler, glanced at my muddy boots, then at his clipboard. He didn't find my name. Of course he didn't. To the Hayes dynasty, I wasn't a granddaughter. I was a glitch in the software. At the front of the room, the casket gleamed mahogany under soft lights. Robert Hayes lay inside, looking smaller than I remembered. Death had smoothed the deep lines of skepticism that had defined his face for 80 years. The mortician had done a good job at making him look peaceful. It was a lie. Robert Hayes had never known a day of peace in his life. Standing beside the casket, performing the role of grieving daughter with Oscar-worthy precision, was my mother, Victoria. She dabbed at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. Beside her stood my father, James, looking solemn and sturdy, shaking hands with a man I recognized as the vice president of a rival firm. They weren't burying a father. They were finalizing a closing strategy. And then there was Ashley. My younger sister sat in the front row, bathed in soft, flattering light. She held her phone low in her lap, but I knew exactly what she was doing: curating the narrative. Later, I'd check her feed and see a black and white photo of her hand on the casket, accompanied by a caption about losing her guiding star. The engagement metrics would be through the roof. I took a step forward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Heads turned, not in sympathy, but in that sharp, assessing way predators look at wounded animals. I saw a cousin nudge his wife. I saw Victoria's eyes flick up, lock onto mine, then slide away as if I were a stain on the wallpaper. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She simply adjusted her pearls and turned back to the vice president. The service was a masterpiece of fiction. The eulogy spoke of Robert's generosity, his vision, his love for community. There was no mention of the hostile takeovers, the ruthless layoffs, or the way he'd pitted his own children against each other like dogs in a pit. James went to the podium and spoke for 10 minutes about legacy. He used the word stewardship 5 times. I counted. I sat in the very last row near the exit. I kept my coat on. When the service ended, the room transformed instantly into a networking event, the scrambling for position in the power vacuum Robert had left behind. I moved toward the reception hall, intending to grab a bottle of water and leave, but then she appeared. Emma Hayes. I flinched, turning sharply. Standing just outside my personal space was a woman I didn't recognize. She was older, perhaps in her late 50s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that framed intelligent, unblinking eyes. She wore a custom suit with no jewelry and sensible shoes. She looked like a blade that had been sheathed in wool. "Yes?" I said, my guard instantly up. "Elizabeth Carter," she said. She didn't offer a hand. She just held my gaze, studying me like I was a complex legal document she needed to parse for loopholes. "I was your grandfather's private counsel for the matters he kept off the company books." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I didn't know he had private counsel. "That was the point," she said dryly. She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the crowd with the same cynical detachment I felt. She watched James laugh at a joke, throwing his head back a little too far. "They don't know I exist. Not really." They think I'm just an executive assistant." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I don't have much time before they start asking who I am. I just need to know one thing." "What?" I asked. "Do you still have what he gave you?" My hand went instinctively to my pocket. Deep inside, resting against the lining, was a small, heavy object. I hadn't taken it out since the diner in Wilmington. I hadn't even looked at it closely. I just knew it was there, a cold weight that anchored me to reality. "I have it," I said. Elizabeth nodded, a microscopic movement. "Good. Keep it close. Do not lose it. And do not tell them you have it. Not even if they beg. Especially not if they threaten." "What is it?" I asked. "What does it open?" "It opens the truth," she said, "but only if you're brave enough to turn it." She looked over my shoulder. Victoria was approaching, scanning the room with Predator's focus. "We'll speak tomorrow at the reading," Elizabeth said, loud enough for a passerby to hear. "Please arrive promptly at 10. Then she turned and melted into the crowd, vanishing as effectively as a ghost. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I shoved my hand into my pocket and curled my fingers around the metal. It was a key, simple, heavy, brass. The metal felt colder than it should, like it was absorbing the heat from my body. Victoria spotted me. Her eyes narrowed. She started to move toward me, her face arranging itself into a mask of maternal concern that I knew hid 1,000 knives. I didn't wait. I turned on my heel and walked out. 31 days earlier, the call came at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was at my desk at Redwood Harbor Forensics, deep in the digital architecture of a pharmaceutical company that had somehow lost $40 million in inventory. My phone buzzed against the laminate desktop, a sound that usually meant a spam caller or wrong number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the caller ID, PA Estate, the landline from the main house. I hadn't received a call from that number in 6 years. My heart didn't race. It didn't flutter. It simply stopped, seizing up like an engine that had run out of oil. "Hello?" I said, my voice professional, detached. "Emma?" The voice was unrecognizable at first. It sounded like dry leaves scraping against concrete, breathless, hollow, weak. But the cadence, the imperious, demanding rhythm of the syllables was unmistakable. "Grandfather?" I asked. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Robert Hayes didn't believe in small talk. He believed in transactions. "Are you still doing that work?" he wheezed. "The investigations, the fraud hunting." It was the first time in my life he'd acknowledged my career without sneering. "Yes," I said. "Good," he said. "Because I need you to be better at it than you've ever been." There was a pause. I could hear the background noise on his end, the rhythmic beep of a medical monitor, the hum of an oxygen machine. He was dying. I knew it instantly. "I need to see you," he said. "Not here, not at the house. The house has ears." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Where?" "Wilmington," he said. "Delaware, tomorrow, noon. There's a diner on Route 13 called the Silver Spoon. Do you know it?" "I can find it." "Come alone," he commanded. Then his voice dropped, losing its command and replacing it with something that chilled me to the bone. Fear. "And Emma, if you tell your mother, if you tell anyone, don't bother coming. Just wait for the obituary." The line went dead. The Silver Spoon was exactly the kind of place Robert Hayes would never be caught dead in. It was a chrome and neon relic from the 50s that had seen better decades. The parking lot was full of trucks and worn-out sedans. Inside, the air conditioning rattled and hissed like a dying animal. The air smelled of bacon grease, burnt coffee, and despair. I saw him in the back booth. He looked terrible. He was wearing a trench coat that looked 3 sizes too big for his shrunken frame. A baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes. He looked like a fugitive. I slid into the booth opposite him. He didn't look up immediately. He was staring at his hands, which were resting on the Formica table. They were shaking. Not a little tremor, but a violent, rhythmic shaking that he was trying to control by clasping them together. "Grandpa," I said softly. He looked up. His eyes were the only thing that hadn't changed. They were still that piercing ice blue that could dissect a balance sheet in seconds. But the whites were yellowed and the skin around them was paper thin. "You came," he said. "You asked." He looked around the diner. His eyes scanned the other patrons. A trucker eating eggs, a young couple arguing in hushed tones, a waitress wiping down the counter. Then he looked up at the corner of the ceiling. A security camera blinked with a slow red light. "Good," he muttered. "Cameras, witnesses, but not their witnesses." "Whose witnesses?" I asked. He ignored the question. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 2 items. He slid them across the sticky table. The first was a key. It was heavy, brass, old-fashioned. It didn't look like a house key. It looked like a safe deposit box key from a bank, the kind that requires a second master key to turn. It had a number stamped on it, but he'd covered the number with a piece of electrical tape. The second item was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, an archaic, dramatic touch that was purely Robert. "Take them," he said. I reached out and covered the items with my hand. The key was cold. "What are these?" "Insurance," he said, "and a test." He leaned forward, and for a moment the rattle of the air conditioner seemed to fade. "I'm going to die soon, Emma. Don't give me that look. It's a fact. The doctors give me 6 weeks. I give myself 4. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, though I wasn't sure why. "Don't be sorry, be smart," he snapped. "When I die, the sharks will come. James, Victoria, the board. They've been circling for years, waiting for the blood in the water. They think they have it all figured out. They think the will is just a formality." He let out a dry, hacking laugh that turned into a cough. He pressed a handkerchief to his mouth. When he pulled it away, I saw a speck of red. "They're going to read the will," he said, his voice raspy. "And they're going to laugh at you. I made sure of it." I frowned. "You made sure they would laugh at me?" "I had to," he said. "I had to make you look like the loser. I had to make you look insignificant. If they think you're a threat, they'll destroy you before the game even starts. But if they think you're a joke, they'll ignore you, and that's when you strike." He pointed a shaking finger at the envelope under my hand. "They'll give Ashley the fortune," he said. "They'll give your parents the empire, and they'll give you nothing but an insult. When that happens, when they laugh, you take this key, you answer the lawyer's question, and you burn them to the ground." "What question?" I asked. "What lawyer?" "You'll know," he said. "Elizabeth Carter. She's the only one I trust. She's the only one James hasn't bought yet." He grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, desperate. "Emma, listen to me. Your mother is not the woman you think she is. I used to think she was just weak, just easily led by your father. I was wrong." His eyes widened, and I saw genuine terror in them. It was a look I'd never associated with Robert Hayes. He was the man who made senators tremble. "She's hungry," he whispered, "and she's done things that would put her in prison for the rest of her life if the light ever touched them. That's why they need the company. They don't just want the money. They need the structure. They need the cover." He released my wrist and slumped back against the booth. "Don't open the envelope until I'm dead," he said. "And hide that key. If they find it, if they even suspect you have it, they'll come for you. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. "But why me? You haven't spoken to me in years." He looked at me with a strange expression. It wasn't love. It was respect. "Because you're the only one who left," he said. "You're the only one who didn't take the easy money. You're the only Hayes who actually knows how to work." He stood up, his joints popping. "Go, leave first. I'll wait here for my driver. Don't let anyone see us together." I stood up. I put the key and the envelope in my purse. "Goodbye, Grandpa." He didn't answer. He was already looking at the security camera again, calculating the angles. I walked out of the diner and into the harsh sunlight. My heart was pounding. I got into my car, a reliable Honda that I'd paid for with my own money, and pulled onto the highway. I checked my rearview mirror. Traffic was moderate. A few trucks, a blue sedan, a black SUV. I drove for 10 minutes, my mind racing. She's hungry. They need the cover. What had they done? What kind of mess had James and Victoria created that was big enough to scare a billionaire? I checked the mirror again. The trucks were gone. The blue sedan had exited. The black SUV was still there. It was a Chevy Suburban. Tinted windows. No front license plate. 3 car lengths back. Standard following distance. I felt a prickle of paranoia. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself. It's a popular car. This is a busy highway. I decided to test it. I took the next exit, swerving at the last second across the painted lines. It was a dangerous move that earned me a long honk from a delivery truck. I watched the mirror. The black SUV swerved too. It cut off the truck, ignoring the horn, and followed me onto the off-ramp. My mouth went dry. I drove down a secondary road, passing strip malls and gas stations. I took a right turn, then another right, then a third right. I was driving in a circle. The SUV stayed with me. It didn't speed up. It didn't try to run me off the road. It just hung there, a dark, silent shadow in my mirror. They weren't trying to catch me. They were letting me know I was caught. They were sending a message. I pulled into a crowded shopping center parking lot, weaving through lanes. I parked quickly between 2 large vans, shielding my car from view. I slouched down in my seat, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. I saw the black SUV cruise slowly down the main lane. It paused at the end of the row, brake lights glowing like red eyes. Then slowly, it turned and drove away. I didn't move for another 20 minutes. When I finally got back on the road, I took a chaotic route, doubling back, taking side streets, ensuring I was clean. By the time I reached the cheap motel I'd checked into for the night, I was exhausted. I locked the door. Deadbolt, chain, wedged a chair under the handle. Then I sat on the bed and took the envelope out of my purse. "Don't open it until I'm dead," he'd said. But Robert Hayes was a man of secrets, and I was a woman who uncovered them. I needed to know what I was carrying. I needed to know why I'd been chased. I slid my finger under the wax seal. It cracked with a satisfying snap. I pulled out the contents. There was no money. There were no account numbers. There was no confession. There was just a single sheet of heavy, watermarked stationery. On it, in Robert's distinctive, jagged handwriting, was a single sentence. "She knows why." Below it was his signature, trailing off at the end, the ink blotchy as if his hand had given out mid-stroke. I stared at the paper. Who was she? Was it Victoria? Ashley? Elizabeth? Or was it me? Was he telling them that I knew? Or was he telling me that someone else knew? The ambiguity was maddening. It was a riddle wrapped in a threat. My phone chimed. I jumped, dropping the paper on the bedspread. It was a text message. Unknown number. No ID. No location. I opened it. "Stop digging, Emma." I froze. I looked at the window. The curtains were drawn, but I felt exposed. Naked. They knew. They knew I'd met him. They knew I had the envelope. The black SUV hadn't just been a warning. It had been a chaperone. I looked back at the paper. She knows why. I realized then that Robert was right. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a war, and I had just been drafted onto the front lines with a weapon I didn't know how to use and a target painted on my back. But then a second bubble appeared on my phone. Daniel. They cornered me. Legal and HR forced me to sign NDA or face federal charges for data breach. I'm out. I can't help you anymore. Daniel Brooks, my friend from college, compliance officer at one of the major banks. My heart sank. Daniel was gone. I was truly alone. But then a third message came through. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I knew you'd need the audit trail for the offshore accounts. I couldn't email it. Too many filters. My breath caught. I left what you need inside the box. Safety Deposit Box 91. I bribed the attendant to slip the envelope into the cassette before they sealed the vault for the night. "It's waiting for you." I stared at the screen. Box 91. Robert had given me a key. He'd covered the number with tape. I pulled out the envelope again, the one with "She knows why." I grabbed my LED keychain light and held it behind the heavy paper, shining the beam through the fiber. There, Embedded in the watermark of the paper itself, invisible to the naked eye unless backlit, was a number. And below it, a bank routing number that corresponded to the First National Bank of Philadelphia. Robert hadn't just given me a random key, he'd given me the key to Box 91, and he'd coordinated with Daniel, or anticipated that I would need a drop point to ensure that the box contained not just his secrets, but the fresh evidence I would need to bury them. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the key in the inside pocket of my jacket, zipped it shut, and put the jacket under my pillow. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the motel, the ice machine, the highway traffic, the footsteps in the hall, and wondering which one of them was coming for me. And now, a month later, sitting at the back of the funeral home after his reading, I finally understood the first part of his plan. The laughter, the dollar insult. It was all theater. He'd lowered their guard. He'd made them think I was nothing, but he'd given me the key. The reception area was a cavernous room with high ceilings and chandeliers that dripped crystal. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked like miniature architectural projects. I stood near a pillar, watching. James was in a tight circle with 3 men in gray suits. I saw his lips move. Cayman. It was a whisper, but in the acoustic perfection of the room, it carried. Cayman accounts. Structure. Monday morning. He wasn't grieving. He was checking the inventory. Quite the turnout, isn't it? I turned. A man I vaguely recognized as a board member smiled at me with practiced sympathy. Your grandfather was a remarkable man. You must be devastated. Devastated, I repeated flatly. He blinked, uncertain how to read my tone, then excused himself quickly. I watched my family work the room. Victoria had changed into a different dress, still black, but somehow more approachable. She moved from group to group, accepting condolences with grace, her hand resting lightly on arms, her smile sad but warm. It was a masterclass in performance. Ashley stood near the buffet, flanked by 2 of her influencer friends. They were taking photos, discreet, tasteful angles that would later be filtered and captioned with something about finding light in darkness. I checked my phone. I had 17 text messages, all from numbers I didn't recognize. I opened one. We're so sorry for your loss. If you need anything, the Hayes family is here for you. It was from a foundation email address. A form letter. They'd sent it to everyone in the contact list, including me, the estranged granddaughter who'd been explicitly uninvited from family gatherings for the past 6 years. I deleted it. Emma. I looked up. Victoria was standing in front of me. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her mouth that no amount of concealer could hide. She looked tired, or maybe she was just tired of pretending. I'm glad you came, she said. Her voice was soft, measured. I know things have been difficult between us, but today isn't about old wounds. It's about family. Is it? I asked. Her smile tightened at the edges. Your father and I were talking. We'd like you to come back to the house tonight, just for a little while. We have some things we need to discuss, about the estate, about your future. My future. We want to help you, Emma. We know you've been struggling. The city, the job, the pressure. It can't be easy. The city, the job, the pressure. Code words. Translation. We know you're broke, desperate, and vulnerable. I'm fine, Mother. Are you? She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Because from what I hear, that firm of yours isn't exactly thriving. Forensic accounting. It's such a niche field, so uncertain. There it was, the threat disguised as concern. I appreciate the offer, I said, my voice ice cold. But I have other plans tonight. Victoria's eyes narrowed, just for a fraction of a second. Then the mask slipped back into place. Of course. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find us. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I needed air. I needed to get away from the suffocating perfume and the lies. I moved toward the side exit, pushing through a service door that led to a hallway. The hallway was quiet. I walked past a restroom, past a supply closet, and stopped in front of a heavy oak door at the end. Robert's private study. This had been the forbidden zone when we were kids. the place where the money was made, the place where the decisions were handed down. I'd only been inside twice in my entire life. Once when I was 10 and found the 18-cent error, and once when I was 17 and everything changed. I pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. The room smelled of him. Tobacco, old leather, and peppermint. The desk was clear, stripped of papers. The bookshelves were lined with legal texts and biographies of tycoons. I walked to the desk and ran my hand along the edge. This was where he'd sat when he'd called me. This was where he'd planned his revenge. I looked around, soaking in the details. The heavy velvet curtains, the grandfather clock ticking its slow rhythm. I froze. There, on the spine of a book on the shelf directly facing the desk, was a tiny black dot. I stepped closer, squinting. It wasn't a screw. It was a lens, a pinhole camera. And it wasn't old, dust-covered tech. The casing around it still had a tiny sliver of blue plastic film on the edge, the kind you peel off a new device. It was brand new. I scanned the room with fresh eyes. There was another one on top of the curtain rod, a third, nestled in the leaves of the artificial fern by the door. They'd bugged the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why? Robert was dead. There were no more meetings to record, unless they were waiting for someone. They knew about the she knows why note. They knew there might be a key. They thought I would come here to his sanctuary to look for a safe, to look for a clue. They were waiting to catch me opening a hidden panel or retrieving a document so they could accuse me of theft before the will was even read. If I touched anything in this room, they'd have it on 4K video. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, deliberate. I couldn't let them know I'd seen the cameras. I couldn't let them know I was onto the surveillance. I had to play the part they'd written for me. I spun around and grabbed the edge of the desk, forcing my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I hyperventilated, pulling air in short, panic-induced gasps. The door opened. It was Victoria. "Emma?" she asked, her voice sharp. "What are you doing in here?" I turned to her, my eyes wide, clutching my chest. "I can't," I gasped, sinking to my knees on the oriental rug. "I can't breathe. It smells like him. It's too much." I put my head between my knees, rocking back and forth. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, fueled by genuine adrenaline. Victoria stood over me. She didn't kneel to help. She didn't call for water. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she sighed. "Get up, Emma. You're being hysterical." "I need air," I choked out. "I need to get out." I scrambled to my feet, stumbling a little, knocking into a side table. A lamp wobbled. "I'm leaving," I gasped. "I can't stay here. I can't." "Emma, stop it," Victoria hissed. James, come here. She's having one of her episodes." I didn't wait for James. I pushed past her, running down the hallway. I burst through the side door that led to the connecting garage. The garage was cold and dark, smelling of gasoline and rubber. James's Porsche and the family SUV sat there like sleeping beasts. I leaned against the cold concrete wall, hidden behind the bulk of the SUV, out of sight of the house door. I dropped the act instantly. My breathing steadied. My face went cold. I pulled out my burner phone and dialed Elizabeth. "They're watching," I whispered the second she picked up. "What?" "The study," I said. "Cameras, brand new. They're baiting me to look for something. They want to catch me stealing estate property." "Did you touch anything?" "No, I saw them. I faked a panic attack and got out." "Good," Elizabeth said. "Smart. They're paranoid. That means they're terrified. Get out of there, Emma. Go back to the motel." "I'm going," I said. "But Elizabeth, if they're watching the study, they might be watching the bank too." "The bank is federal territory," she said. "They can't put cameras in the vault room. Just stick to the plan." I hung up. I was about to open the garage door when my phone buzzed again. Another text. Unknown number. I opened it. "Daniel." They cornered me. Legal and HR. Forced me to sign NDA or face federal charges for data breach. I'm out. I can't help you anymore." My heart sank. Daniel was gone. But then a second message appeared. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I knew you'd need the audit trail for the offshore accounts. I couldn't email it. Too many filters. A third message. I left what you need inside the box. Safety deposit box 91. I bribed the attendant to slip the envelope into the cassette before they sealed the vault for the night. It's waiting for you. I stared at the screen. Box 91. I heard the door from the house open. Emma! James's voice boomed into the garage. Where the hell are you? Stop acting like a child and come back inside. I hit the button to open the garage door. The gears ground loudly, drowning out James's footsteps. I'm leaving, James! I shouted without turning around. I'll see you at the reading! I ducked under the rising door and ran into the rain toward my rental car. I drove fast, the tires slick on the wet asphalt. I didn't go back to the motel immediately. I drove to a parking lot overlooking the city skyline and turned off the engine. They were in that house right now, drinking Robert's scotch, toasting to their cleverness. They thought the cameras in the study were a masterstroke. They thought the threats had silenced me. They thought Daniel was neutralized. They thought they'd won. I looked in the rearview mirror and wiped a raindrop from my cheek. Enjoy the scotch, I whispered to the empty car. Drink it all. Tomorrow they would walk into that conference room expecting a surrender. They would sign the waiver to get their millions, believing they were untouchable, and that was exactly when I would sign their death warrant. I pulled out my phone one more time. I needed to see it. I needed confirmation that I wasn't imagining the coordinates Robert had left me. I opened the photo of the she knows why letter I'd taken with my LED light behind it. There it was, clear as day in the watermark. 91. First National Bank of Philadelphia. Robert Hayes and a 20-something compliance officer had outplayed my entire family. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. My face was pale, my hair slightly messy from the rain. I looked like a woman on the edge of a breakdown. But in the glass, I saw the set of my jaw, the hardness in my eyes. I wasn't a child. I wasn't a victim. I started the car and drove back to the motel. It was time to sleep. I needed to be well rested for the execution. The motel room smelled of mildew and industrial carpet cleaner. It was 6 a.m, the day after the funeral, the day of the reading. Outside, the sky was still dark, but the parking lot lights cast long yellow rectangles across my ceiling. I hadn't slept. My laptop glowed blue in the darkness, the only light in the room. I'd been working for 5 hours straight, and the hotel's complimentary coffee had long since gone cold in its styrofoam cup. On my screen was the encrypted drive Robert had left me, the one I'd extracted from the envelope during that first night in the motel, the night I'd been followed by the black SUV. I'd tried for weeks to crack the password. I'd tried his birthday. I'd tried the date he founded the company. I'd tried every significant number I could remember from my childhood. Nothing worked. But tonight, sitting in the dark with the funeral fresh in my mind, I remembered something. A lesson. A moment. I was 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen island of the Hayes estate, struggling with a complex algebra problem. Robert had walked in, leaning on his cane, smelling of cigars and old paper. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He looked at my notebook. "Check the variables, Emma," he'd said, his voice gravelly. "People lie. Words can be twisted. But numbers are the only honest things on this God-forsaken planet. If the equation doesn't balance, someone is stealing from you." Then he'd walked to his study, and I'd followed him later with my homework. That's when I found it. A mistake in his personal ledger. A transposition error. He'd written 79 instead of 97. It had caused a discrepancy of 18 cents in a multi-million-dollar account. Most people would have ignored it. I circled it in red ink and left it on his desk. He'd called me in the next morning. He looked at the ledger, then at me. "You found it," he'd said. "It was 18 cents, I'd replied. "It's never just 18 cents, he'd told me. "It's the flaw in the architecture. If you can't trust the pennies, you can't trust the millions." He'd taken a gold pen from his pocket, the one he used to sign the most important contracts, and handed it to me. "Remember that number, Emma. 18. It's the price of being right when everyone else is lazy." Then he'd made me calculate what that error would compound to over 10 years at 5% interest. Without a calculator. On the spot. $29.32. I typed into the password box. 2932. The screen flashed. The box turned green. Access granted. The file opened. It wasn't a document. It was a video. The thumbnail showed Robert sitting in his study looking straight at the camera. He was holding up a copy of the Wall Street Journal with a date, the date from 2 weeks ago, the day before he'd called me. I adjusted the volume. My hand was trembling slightly. The video began to play. "Emma." His voice was rough, labored. He was breathing heavily, each word an effort. "If you're watching this, you figured out the password. Good. That means you remember. That means you're paying attention." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He pressed a handkerchief to his mouth. "I don't have much time, so listen carefully. What you're about to see is 10 years of evidence. 10 years of theft, fraud, and betrayal. Your parents have been using the Hayes Family Foundation as their personal bank account. They've been laundering money through shell corporations. They've been lying to the IRS, to the board, to me." He paused, his ice blue eyes boring into the camera. "I knew. I've known for years. And I did nothing. That's my sin, Emma. I chose the company over the truth. I chose my legacy over justice. But you don't have to make that choice. You can finish what I was too cowardly to start." The video ended abruptly. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. The screen now showed a folder structure, neat and organized. 2015_tax_evasion, 2018_shell_corporations, 2020_offshore_accounts 2023, _guardianship_plot, and one more folder, foundation_ledgers_full_access. I clicked on it. Inside were hundreds of PDF files, bank statements, grant applications, wire transfer receipts, board meeting minutes. This was the raw data, the unvarnished truth. I opened my own software, the forensic accounting tools I used at Redwood Harbor. I started building a timeline. The Hayes Family Foundation was a nonprofit entity, legally required to disperse 5% of its assets annually to maintain its tax-exempt status. Robert had set it up decades ago to support rural education and art preservation. I scrolled through last year's recipients. The Philadelphia Museum of Art, $50,000. St. Jude's Children's Hospital, $25,000. These were legitimate. These were the donations they put on glossy brochures and Instagram feeds. They were the smokescreen. I dug deeper, looking for outliers, donations just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic external audit. There. October 12th. A grant of $175,000 to an organization called Harbor Field Services, LLC, for educational logistics and community outreach. I frowned. I'd never heard of Harbor Field Services. I opened a new tab and pulled up the Delaware Division of Corporations database. Delaware is the black hole of corporate transparency. You can register a company there without ever putting a human name on a public document. But I had access to a proprietary database at Redwood Harbor that scraped registered agent data. I ran the name. Harbor Field Services was a shell. No website, no phone number. Its registered address was a strip mall mailbox in Dover. But the banking information, that was interesting. I cross-referenced the routing number from the foundation's wire transfer with the internal notes Robert had left on the drive. The money went into Harbor Field Services, stayed there for exactly 48 hours, and was then wired out as a consulting fee to another entity, Lumina Strategy Group. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Lumina. I knew that name. 3 years ago, Ashley had announced she was starting a lifestyle brand and consulting firm. She'd thrown a launch party that cost more than my condo. She called it Lumina. At the time, she'd claimed it was to help high-net-worth individuals curate their personal brands. I pulled up Lumina's tax ID. It was registered directly to Ashley Hayes. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking together with the satisfying snap of a loaded gun. Here was the play. The Hayes Family Foundation donates tax-free money to Harbor Field Services. That shell company claims to do educational work but actually does nothing. It then hires Ashley's company Lumina for consulting, paying her a massive fee. The money leaves the family pot tax-free as a charitable donation. It arrives in Ashley's pocket as business revenue, which she can then offset with business expenses, her car, her travel, her designer wardrobe. It was a wash cycle. They were cleaning the money right under Robert's nose. But Ashley wasn't smart enough to set up a Delaware shell company. Ashley thought liquidity had something to do with juice cleanses. Someone else had built this engine. Someone who knew the regulations inside and out. I needed to trace the authorization. I looked at the timestamp on the wire transfer to Harbor Field Services. It was authorized at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. I checked the Foundation's bylaws, which Robert had helpfully included in the file. Any grant over $50,000 required dual signatures, the treasurer and a board director. The treasurer was a man named Arthur Pence, a spineless accountant who'd been on James's payroll for 20 years. No surprise there. But the board director signature, that was the key. I pulled up the authorization log. The digital signature was a chaotic scrawl, but the user ID associated with the approval key was clear. User v.hayes_admin v.victoria. My mother. I stared at the screen. Victoria, who claimed she got a headache whenever someone mentioned interest rates. Victoria, who played the role of the dizzy, devoted wife who just wanted everyone to get along. I opened her user history log. It wasn't just this one transaction. September 4th, approved $120,000 to Greenleaf Initiatives, another shell. August 1st, approved $85,000 to Urban Renewal Partners, another shell. June 15th, approved $200,000 to Brightwater Consulting, LLC, shell. She'd been doing this for years. The timestamps showed she was logging in at odd hours, midnight, 5 in the morning on Sundays. She was reviewing the files carefully, methodically, and there were notes, rejection notes attached to some of the submissions. Note from user Vive. Hayes. Too risky. Vendor name too similar to known political, P. AC. Change, L. LC name and resubmit next quarter. Note from user V. Hayes. Wire transfer timing conflicts with audit window. Delay disbursement until Q2. My breath caught in my throat. This was not the note of a clueless trophy wife. This was the note of a compliance officer. This was the note of someone who knew exactly how to skirt the edge of the law without falling off. Robert was right. She's hungry. Victoria wasn't the victim of James's greed. She was the architect. James was just the face, the loud, golfing, handshaking distraction. Victoria was the one moving the chess pieces. I needed more. I needed to know where the money went after it hit Ashley's account. Did she keep it or did it move again? I pulled up my encrypted messaging app. It was almost midnight, but I knew who to call. Daniel Brooks, my friend from college. Now a mid-level compliance officer at one of the major banks in New York, the bank that handled Lumina's accounts. I typed, "Need a favor. Routing number check. Just a yes or no. Is this account flagging for structuring?" I sent Ashley's Lumina account number. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Daniel was an insomniac. Daniel. It's been 2 years. You owe me a drink. Me. I owe you a bottle. Just check the number. A minute passed. Then 2. The silence stretched out, making the hum of the mini-fridge sound like a jet engine. Daniel. This is a Hayes account. I can't touch this. Me. I'm not asking you to touch it. I'm asking if the automated system touched it. Another long pause. Daniel. It has 6 suspicious activity reports filed in the last 18 months, all ignored by regional manager. Override codes used. My stomach tightened. Ignored SARs meant someone higher up at the bank was being paid off or pressured. Me. Who authorized the override? Daniel. Stop. Seriously, I just queried the account history and a red flag popped up on my terminal. Not a compliance flag, a security flag. Me. What kind of security flag? Daniel. Internal monitor. Do not query. Notify legal immediately. I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel, someone has a tripwire on this account. If anyone looks at it, anyone who isn't on the approved list, it alerts the account holder's legal team. I just tripped it. Me. I'm sorry, Daniel. Log off. Say it was a typo. Daniel. Too late. But there's a note in the security log. It says, if queried by E. Hayes or Associates, track IP. They were waiting for me. They knew I would look. Victoria knew exactly how my brain worked. She knew I would follow the money, so she'd mind the road. Daniel, I'm scrubbing my query log. Don't contact me again on this line. And run. The chat disconnected. I sat there, my heart thumping against my ribs. They'd anticipated this. They'd anticipated me. But I wasn't done yet. I looked back at the laptop. I had Victoria's digital fingerprints all over the foundation accounts, but I needed the smoking gun that linked the shell companies directly to James. Ashley was sloppy, but James was careful. His name wasn't on the Delaware paperwork. I went back to the raw data from Robert's drive. I looked at the metadata of the PDF registration forms for Harbor Field Services. The document author was listed as admin, useless. But the document properties showed something interesting. It had been created at 4:30 in the morning on a Saturday. I cross-referenced this with the family calendar. Victoria religiously updated a shared calendar with the household staff, and she'd never bothered to revoke the guest privileges from my old email address. I logged in, still had access. On that specific Saturday at that specific time, the calendar entry read, James, Home Office, private call with Zurich. Zurich. If James was moving money through Switzerland, he wouldn't use a standard bank transfer. He'd use cryptocurrency to bridge the gap before fiat conversion. It was the modern way to wash money. I pulled up the foundation's bank statements again. I looked for transfers to crypto exchanges. Nothing. They were too smart for that. But there were IT service payments. Massive ones. $20,000 a month to a company called Blockframe Solutions. I ran a trace on Blockframe. It wasn't an IT company. It was a high-frequency trading bot host, a service that wealthy individuals used to obscure crypto transactions. I pulled up my own tools, blockchain analysis software that cost Redwood Harbor $50,000 a year to license. I scraped the blockchain for wallets associated with Blockframe's known deposit addresses. It took 2 hours. My laptop fan whirred like a helicopter taking off. I sat there drinking cold water from the bathroom tap, watching the code scroll across my screen. And then I got a hit. A wallet address that had received $3 million in Tether over the last 2 years. The wallet was anonymous, just a string of alphanumeric characters. But forensic accounting is about finding the mistake. Everyone makes one mistake. I analyzed the outflow from that wallet. It was mostly clean, moved through mixers and tumblers to obscure the trail. But on one occasion, just once, 0.01 Bitcoin was sent directly to a bespoke luxury watch dealer in London. I looked up the dealer. I searched their recent sales catalog, and there it was, on James's Instagram from last year. A photo of him at a charity gala, his wrist prominently displayed. He was wearing a limited edition Patek Philippe Nautilus. The caption read, "A little gift to myself. #blessed, #timepiece, #worth it." He'd paid for the watch directly from the crypto wallet. He'd linked his anonymous slush fund to his wrist. I took a screenshot. I highlighted the transaction hash. I overlaid the Instagram photo with the transaction timestamp. "Got you," I whispered. I compiled everything into a single encrypted file. I named it project_icarus.pdf because they'd flown too close to the sun and I was about to melt their wings. I uploaded it to a dead drop server that only I could access. And I set a timed release. If I didn't log in every 12 hours to reset the timer, the file would automatically be emailed to the IRS, the SEC, and the New York Times. It was insurance. If something happened to me, if Victoria's people got to me before I could trigger Robert's trap, the truth would still come out. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. My eyes burned. My back ached. But the dossier was complete. It was a map of their greed drawn in red ink. I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain and looked out at the parking lot. The rain had stopped, but the asphalt still gleamed wet under the lights. Tomorrow, today actually, in 7 hours, I would walk into that conference room. I would sit across from my family, and I would watch them sign their own death warrants. I let the curtain fall back into place. I needed to see what was in Box 91. I needed Robert's final piece of the puzzle. The First National Bank of Philadelphia was a cathedral of silence. It was 8:15 in the morning, 15 minutes after they'd opened the heavy bronze doors. The air inside smelled of floor wax and old currency, a scent I'd always associated with safety, but today it smelled like a crime scene waiting to be processed. I walked to the safety deposit viewing area. I did not look like the heir to a billion-dollar empire. I looked like a woman who'd spent the night in a cheap motel staring at a laptop screen. My eyes were gritty, my skin pale, but my hand resting on the strap of my bag was steady. The bank officer was a man named Mr. Henderson. He was elderly, with impeccable posture and a suit that looked like it had been ironed with military precision. He didn't ask for my ID. He simply looked at me, gave a curt nod, and led me toward the vault. Elizabeth must have called ahead. Or perhaps Robert had left instructions as precise as his financial ledgers. We walked into the vault. It was a room of steel and chrome, lined from floor to ceiling with numbered metal drawers. It felt like a morgue for money. "Box 91, Mr. Henderson said softly. He inserted his master key into the left lock. I took the heavy brass key, the one Robert had given me in the diner, the one I'd slept with under my pillow, and inserted it into the right lock. We turned them in unison. The mechanism clicked, a heavy, satisfying sound. "Mr." Henderson pulled the long metal cassette out of the wall and carried it to a private viewing room. He set it on the table. "Take as much time as you need, Ms. Hayes," he said. Then he closed the door, leaving me alone with the metal box. I stared at it for a long moment. This was it. This was the dead drop. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry. There were no stacks of cash. There were just 3 items: a black USB drive, a worn leather notebook, the leather cracked and fading to gray, a single white envelope addressed simply to Emma. I reached for the envelope first. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. It was the same red wax seal Robert had used on the "She Knows Why" note. I pulled out the letter. It was handwritten. Robert hated typing. He believed that if you were going to say something important, you should bleed the ink onto the page yourself. "Emma, if you're reading this, then you were brave enough to use the key. And if you used the key, it means my family, our family, has treated you exactly as I predicted they would." I sat down in the leather chair. The paper shook in my hand. "You were right. On that night in November, 17 years ago. You were right." I stopped breathing. I heard the paper tear too. "Emma, I was standing in the hallway just around the corner from you. I heard James tell your mother to destroy the restriction clause. I heard them plotting to use the foundation as their personal piggy bank." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I should have walked in. I should have fired them both. I should have called the police. But I was a coward, not for myself, for the company. The IPO was 3 months away. A scandal involving the CFO and his wife embezzling charitable funds would have destroyed the stock price. It would have ruined the legacy I'd spent 50 years building. So I walked away. I let them think they'd gotten away with it. I signed the papers the next day, knowing they were forged. I chose the company over the truth. And then you left. When you walked out of that house, Emma, you took the last scrap of honor this family had with you. I watched you go. I watched you struggle. I watched you wait tables and take out student loans. And every day, I hated myself a little more for letting you do it alone. But I couldn't bring you back. If I had brought you back, they would have corrupted you or destroyed you. So I let you stay out in the cold, because the cold preserves things. It makes them hard. It makes them sharp. I wiped a tear from my cheek. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd quarantined me. I know they'll laugh at the dollar. Let them. They see the dollar as a value. You know better. You know that in binary code, 1 is the signal. 0 is the silence. You are the signal, Emma. You are the only one who is real. Use what's in this box. Finish what I was too weak to start. Robert, I put the letter down. The silence in the room felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with his regret. I reached for the leather notebook. It was an old ledger, the kind accountants used before computers. I opened it. The pages were filled with columns of numbers written in Robert's jagged handwriting. Dates, amounts. I scanned the entries. They went back 15 years, to the year I'd left home. January 1st, 2010. Transfer to eTrust. $5,000. February 1st, 2010. Transfer to eTrust. $5,000. March 1st, 2010. Transfer to eTrust. $5,000. I turned the pages. The amounts grew over time. June 2015. Transfer to eTrust. $20,000. August 2020. Transfer to eTrust. $50,000. December 2023. Transfer to eTrust. $100,000. I frowned. eTrust. I'd never received this money. I'd paid my own tuition. I'd paid my own rent. I'd lived on a salary of $85,000 a year. I flipped to the back of the notebook. There was a summary page written in Robert's distinctive hand. Beneficiary, Emma Hayes. Custodian, Elizabeth Carter. Trust structure, blind, revocable trust. Current asset, value, $42,380,000. I gasped, the sound loud in the small room. He hadn't disinherited me. He'd been paying me a shadow allowance for 15 years, diverting the clean profits of his personal investments into a trust that James and Victoria couldn't see. He'd hidden $42 million for me, letting it compound in index funds and blue-chip stocks, waiting for the day I was strong enough to claim it. The dollar in the will wasn't an insult. It was a decoy. It was a magic trick. Make James and Victoria look at his left hand while his right hand held the real fortune. He'd made me rich before he'd even died, and he'd done it without letting me become one of them. I ran my fingers over the numbers. $42 million. It was a number that meant freedom. It meant I never had to work for another soul again. But looking at the ledger, I didn't feel relief. I felt determination. The money didn't matter if the people who'd made his life a misery got to keep the crown. I closed the notebook. I put it and the letter into my bag. Then I picked up the USB drive. This was the weapon. This was the combination of Robert's long-term evidence and the fresh audit trail Daniel had risked his career to provide. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and booted it up. I didn't care about security cameras anymore. I was inside the vault. This was federal territory. I plugged in the USB. The folder structure was neat, organized by year. 2015_tax_evasion, 2018_shell_corporations, 2023, _guardianship_plot. But there was one file sitting outside the folders, an audio file. Question _to_ask_her.mp3. I put in my earbuds. I clicked play. The sound of static filled my ears, followed by the heavy, labored breathing of a dying man. Emma! Robert's voice rasped. It sounded like he was holding the recorder right up to his mouth. Listen to me carefully. Elizabeth knows what to do, but she cannot do it alone. The law requires consent. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made me wince. At the reading, after they've signed the waiver, after they've taken their money, Elizabeth will ask you a question. She'll ask if you're willing to activate the codicil. There was a long pause. I heard the wheeze of his breathing, the beep of a heart monitor in the background. You must say yes, he whispered. Just say yes. Do not hesitate. Do not ask what it means. Just say yes. Another pause, longer this time. Because the moment you say yes, you become the executor, not of the will, but of the evidence. You become the one who opens the door. And Emma, when that door opens, everything on the other side burns. The recording clicked off. I sat back. My heart was pounding. Just say yes. It was a legal trap. The dollar legacy was the bait to get me into the room. The waiver was the lock that trapped James and Victoria, and my yes was the key that dropped the guillotine. I checked the other files on the drive. I opened the folder named Daniel_Brooks_drop. It contained everything Daniel had managed to salvage before they'd forced him to sign the NDA. Chat logs between Victoria and offshore account managers, IP addresses traced to the Cayman Islands, a scanned copy of an internal bank memo flagging Victoria's account for politically exposed person status, a memo that had been suppressed by the regional manager. And one more thing, a video file from the interior of the Hayes home office, dated 3 days ago. I clicked it. The angle was low, hidden. Daniel must have planted a camera during a compliance visit before he'd been fired. The video showed James and Victoria standing by the fireplace in the study, the same study I'd fled from yesterday during my fake panic attack. Victoria swirled her wine. "Are you sure the waiver holds?" James nodded, his back to the camera. "It holds. Even if she finds out about the foundation later, she can't sue. The waiver releases all claims. Once we sign that, we're bulletproof." "And how long until we can move the liquidity?" "Monday morning," James said. "We take it out of the estate accounts, move it to the Cayman entity before any forensic audit can be ordered. By the time anyone realizes what happened, the money will be sitting in a jurisdiction that doesn't cooperate with U.S. subpoenas." Victoria took a sip of wine. "And the girl?" James laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "The girl gets $1. Let her frame it." The video ended. I closed the laptop. I yanked the USB out and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat, right next to the brass key. Let her frame it. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel of the safety deposit box. I didn't look tired anymore. I looked dangerous. I packed everything into my bag, the letter, the notebook, the drive. I checked my watch. It was 8:45 in the morning. The reading was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I had 1 hour and 15 minutes. I walked out of the viewing room. Mr. Henderson was waiting in the hallway. "Is everything in order, Miss Hayes?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything is in order." "Will you be closing the box?" "No," I said. "Keep it open. I might have more to deposit later today." I walked out of the bank and into the morning light. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still a bruised purple, pregnant with the threat of more storms. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat. I looked at the steering wheel. For 34 years, I'd been the error. I'd been the glitch. I'd been the one they'd hidden in the back of the photo. They thought they were going to a will reading. They thought they were going to collect a paycheck. I started the engine. The car purred to life. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp and jagged like glass breaking. It was the laugh of someone who knows the punchline to a joke no one else has heard yet. $1, I said to the empty car. "You're going to wish you'd given me the whole damn world." I put the car in gear and drove toward the law firm. Robert Hayes had spent his entire life building an empire. Today, I was going to use that empire to bury his children. I met Elizabeth Carter in the atrium of Brennan and Associates Legal Building at 9:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the reading. It was a soaring space of glass and steel designed to make human beings feel small and insignificant against the weight of corporate power. People in $3,000 suits rushed past us, clutching coffees and briefcases, oblivious to the fact that 2 women standing near the decorative fountain were about to dismantle a dynasty. Elizabeth looked different today. She wasn't wearing the soft, grandmotherly disguise she'd worn at the funeral. She was wearing a sharp navy suit, her hair pulled back tight. She looked like a litigator who billed by the heartbeat. "Do you have the drive?" she asked, her voice low, barely audible over the rush of the water feature. "I have the original," I said, patting the inside pocket of my blazer. "Right over my heart." "Good." She glanced around the atrium, checking for surveillance. "This is insurance. If they try to search you, if they try to confiscate your bag on some pretext of estate security, I have backup, but you need to keep the original on your person. When the moment comes, you need to be the one to place it on the table, physically. It has to be your hand." "I understand." She stepped closer, her eyes hard and focused. Listen to me closely, Emma. When we go upstairs, the air in that room is going to be toxic. They're going to try to intimidate you. They'll have their own lawyers, sharks from the firm that handles the corporate accounts. They'll slide papers across the table. They'll call them standard acknowledgments or receipt of attendance. Do not sign them. I won't. Do not sign a birthday card. Do not sign a parking validation. Do not pick up a pen until I tell you to. I won't, I promised. But before Elizabeth could say more, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A notification from my keyword tracker, the one I'd set up years ago to monitor my name in public forums and news sites. Alert: Emma Hayes, mentioned in 3 new posts. I opened the app. It linked to a thread on the Mainline Observer, a local gossip forum frequented by the bored, wealthy housewives of Pennsylvania's upper crust. The thread title made my stomach turn. The prodigal daughter returns for the payout. I clicked it. Anonymous user 882. Saw her at the funeral yesterday, looking disheveled. Heard she caused a scene at the casket. Honestly, after the mental breakdown she had in her 20s, I'm surprised the family even let her in the door. It's sad what money does to people. Anonymous is a 104. She hasn't visited Robert in 5 years. But the second he kicks the bucket, she's front row center. I heard she's in debt. Heavy debt. That's why she's back. She's going to contest the will. Poor Victoria and James. They've done so much for this community, and now they have to deal with this drama. I scrolled down. There were dozens of comments, all of them painting a picture of me that was unrecognizable. They called me unstable, manic, greedy. They said I'd been estranged by choice because I was too difficult. They were seeding the narrative. James and Victoria knew they couldn't just cut me out of the will without questions being asked. So they were destroying my credibility first. If I spoke up about the fraud, about the shell companies, about the theft, no one would believe the whistleblower. They would only see the rantings of the crazy, indebted daughter. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked, reading my expression. I showed her the phone. She scanned the screen, her jaw tightening. "They're methodical. I'll give them that." "This is just the warm-up," I said. "There's more." I opened my work email. There was a message flagged urgent and confidential. It was from the HR director at Redwood Harbor Forensics. Subject: urgent, anonymous complaint. "Emma, we need to talk immediately. We received an anonymous package this morning regarding your conduct. Please see the attached and call me as soon as possible." My hand shook as I opened the attachment. It was a photograph. It showed me at a party, maybe age 22. My eyes were half closed, my head tilted back. On the table in front of me were what appeared to be lines of white powder. I stared at the image. I remembered that night. It was a birthday party for a roommate during my senior year of college. I'd been exhausted because I'd just worked a double shift waiting tables. I'd closed my eyes for a second while someone was telling a story. There had been no powder on that table. There had been pretzel crumbs. This was a Photoshop job, and a good one. The lighting matched. The shadows were perfect. But to my boss, who ran a firm based on integrity and precision, this looked like hard evidence that his top analyst had a secret drug habit. "Son of a bitch," I whispered. Elizabeth looked at the screen. "Can you prove it's fake?" "Yes." I pulled out my laptop from my bag, opened it, and ran the image through an error-level analysis tool I kept on my desktop. Within seconds, the heat map lit up. The area around the powder showed inconsistent compression artifacts, the telltale sign of digital manipulation. "It's a forgery," I said, "and not even a particularly good one if you know where to look." I typed a reply to my boss. "The image is a fabrication. I am currently running forensic image analysis and will provide metadata proving the manipulation within the hour. This is a targeted attack timed to coincide with a family legal dispute. I advise you to flag the sender's IP address and preserve all related communications for potential legal action." I hit send. "They're not just trying to beat me," I said, my voice cold. "They're trying to erase me, my reputation, my career, my credibility. If I'm discredited before I even walk into that room, nothing I say will matter." "Then we make sure you don't have to say anything," Elizabeth said. "We let the documents speak. We let the numbers speak. And when the time comes, we let the FBI speak." I closed my laptop and slipped it back into my bag. The FBI? Elizabeth's expression didn't change. There's one more thing you need to know before we go upstairs. My phone rang before Elizabeth could finish her sentence. The name on the screen made my blood pressure spike. Victoria Hayes. Mobile. I looked at Elizabeth. She nodded. Answer it. Record it. I swiped to accept the call and immediately tapped the recording button on my screen. Hello, Mother. Emma, darling. Victoria's voice was like warm honey poured over broken glass. I was just calling to check on you. You left so abruptly yesterday. We were all so worried. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Are you? She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You looked frantic yesterday. Your father and I were talking, and we know how much stress you've been under. The city life, the pressure of that job. She was doing it. She was building the mental instability case on a recorded line. I'm not under stress, Mother. I'm just grieving. Of course you are, sweetheart. But maybe you should take some time after the reading today. Maybe you shouldn't go back to Chicago right away. She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice, sharp as a blade. We know a wonderful facility in Vermont. Very private, very discreet. Just for a few weeks to help you decompress, to get your head straight. A facility. They wanted to have me committed. If I was in a psychiatric treatment center, I couldn't testify. I couldn't access bank records. I couldn't activate Robert's trap. I don't need a facility, I said, my voice steady as stone. Emma, please. We're only trying to protect you. If you start making accusations today, if you start talking about things you don't understand, it will look very bad for you. People will think you're unwell. Another pause. And we wouldn't want that getting back to your employer, would we? I mean, with that photo that's been circulating, there it was, the confirmation. She'd sent the photo. I will see you at 10, Mother, I said, my voice ice cold. Emma, wait! I hung up. Elizabeth was watching me carefully. How do you feel? Angry, I said, which is good. Anger is fuel. My phone rang again. This time it was Ashley. I hit record again before answering. What is it, Ashley? Her voice was high, tight, like she'd been crying or hyperventilating. I can't find my pearl earrings, the ones Grandpa gave me. I need them for the reading. It's bad luck if I don't wear them. I don't have your earrings, Ashley. I know, she stammered. I'm just freaking out. Mom is screaming at Dad. The lawyers are here early. It's a madhouse. She sniffed loudly. Did Grandpa give you anything when you saw him? There it was, the pivot from earrings to the real objective. I haven't seen Grandpa in years, Ashley. You know that. Right. She said it too quickly, like she was reading from a script. But maybe he sent you something? A package? A letter? She paused. Mom keeps asking if you have a key. Why would she ask if you have a key? Ashley was a terrible spy. She was too anxious, too transparent. I don't know what you're talking about, I lied. Because if you do, she lowered her voice to barely a whisper. You should get rid of it, whatever it is. Mom says it's dirty. She says Grandpa was involved in some bad things at the end. She says if that key comes out, we all go down. Even you. I let the silence stretch out for a moment. Then I said, very quietly, I thought you said you didn't know why she was asking about a key. The silence on the other end was deafening. Just be careful, Em, Ashley whispered. They're not playing. The line went dead. I saved the recording immediately. I now had Victoria threatening my career and my freedom. I had Ashley admitting there was a bad thing that could take everyone down. She's terrified, Elizabeth observed. She should be, I said. She signed the papers. She authorized the payments. She's just as guilty as they are. Is she, though? Elizabeth asked. Or is she just a fool who did what her parents told her to do? I thought about that. Ashley had always been the golden child, the one who sparkled. But she'd never been sharp. She'd never asked questions. She'd just accepted the money, the attention, the validation. I don't know, I admitted. And right now, I don't care. She made her choice. My phone buzzed again. A text message this time. Unknown number. I opened it. Daniel. I'm sorry, Em. They made me sign an NDA. Threatened federal prosecution for data breach. I'm out. Account closed. Phone disconnected. This is a burner. My heart sank. So they'd gotten to Daniel after all. But then a second message came through. Daniel. But I'm not stupid. Before they escorted me out, I made a physical copy of everything. The offshore accounts, the wire transfers, the suppressed SARs, all of it. I couldn't email it, too many filters, so I put it in the box. Box 91. It's in an envelope marked Compliance Review Q4 2024. You'll know it when you see it. A third message. Daniel, I also left a copy with my attorney with instructions to release it to the SEC if anything happens to me. They can threaten me, but they can't silence me. Not completely. Burn them, Em. Burn them all. I showed the messages to Elizabeth. She read them and nodded slowly. Daniel Brooks. I'm going to remember that name. When this is over, I'm going to make sure he gets a job offer from every white-collar crime unit in the country. If we survive this, I said. We'll survive, Elizabeth said. The question is whether they will. She checked her watch. It's 9:50. We need to go upstairs. Are you ready? I touched the inside pocket of my blazer, feeling the hard outline of the USB drive. I felt the brass key in my other pocket. I felt the weight of the laptop in my bag, loaded with Project Icarus, my own insurance policy. I'm ready. Good. One more thing before we go up. Elizabeth's expression shifted, becoming even more serious. There's someone in that room who shouldn't be there. Who? A federal agent, Special Agent Miller from the Department of Justice, Organized Crime Division. My eyes widened. How? Robert arranged it, Elizabeth said. 3 weeks before he died, he filed a preliminary whistleblower complaint with the DOJ, citing potential fraud within a federally recognized 501c3 organization. Under federal law, when a complaint involves a charitable foundation with assets over $10 million, the DOJ has the right to send an observer to any estate proceedings that involve the transfer of control. And James and Victoria don't know? They think he's a clerk from the probate court. Robert made sure the filing was sealed, and the agent is under instructions to remain silent unless the codicil is activated. She looked at me. Emma, the moment you say yes to my question, the moment you activate that codicil, Agent Miller will send a text message. That text will unseal a package sitting in a vault in Washington, D.C. That package contains Robert's full confession, 10 years of evidence, and a formal request for immediate investigation. And then the doors lock. The FBI seizes all electronic devices in the room, and your parents get exactly what they deserve. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was an ambush. Let's go, I said. We walked to the elevators together. Elizabeth pressed the button for the 42nd floor. As the doors slid shut and the numbers started to climb, I pulled out my phone one last time. I had one more failsafe to set. I opened my email and found the draft I'd written at 3 in the morning. The one addressed to my boss with the forensic analysis of the fake photo and a preliminary audit of the Hayes Family Foundation. I set a timed delivery. Send in 4 hours. If I walked out of that room a free woman, I'd cancel the email. If I didn't, well, at least the truth would get out. The elevator chimed. Floor 42. The doors opened. We didn't walk straight to the conference room. Instead, Elizabeth led me down a side corridor to a small consultation room. She closed the door behind us. Before we go in there, she said, you need to understand exactly how this is going to play out. Robert was meticulous. He didn't leave anything to chance. She pulled out her tablet and opened a document. The will is public. James and Victoria have already seen it. They know Ashley gets $1 million. They know they get the estate and the foundation. They know you get $1. And they're expecting me to contest it. Exactly. They've prepared for that. They have 3 lawyers in that room ready to bury you in motions, depositions, and continuances. They'll drag it out for years, bleeding you dry with legal fees until you give up. But that's not what's going to happen. No, Elizabeth's eyes gleamed. Because you're not going to contest the will. You're going to accept it." I frowned. "Accept the dollar?" "Accept the role," she corrected. "The role of the defeated, humiliated daughter. You have to let them win, Emma. You have to let them believe their plan worked perfectly, because their arrogance, their absolute certainty that they've outsmarted everyone, that's the key to the lock." She scrolled through the document on her tablet. "There's a clause in the primary distribution agreement. It states that for the primary beneficiaries, James, Victoria, and Ashley, to access their funds immediately and avoid a 5-year probate hold, they must sign a comprehensive release and waiver of claims." "What does the waiver say?" "It says they accept the will as valid. It says they acknowledge the deceased was of sound mind when he drafted it. And this is the crucial part. It says they certify, under penalty of perjury, that they have no knowledge of any misappropriated funds or hidden liabilities within the Hayes estate." Understanding dawned on me like a cold sunrise. "It's a perjury trap." "It's better than that," Elizabeth said. "It's a confession. If they sign that waiver to get their money, they're legally swearing that the books are clean. And if we then prove that the books are dirty, that they've been laundering money through the foundation for years, then they haven't just committed fraud. They've defrauded the estate they just inherited." "And that triggers—" "An automatic forfeiture clause," Elizabeth said. "Everything they inherited, the money, the property, the voting shares, it all reverts to the trust that you control." "But they won't sign it if they think I'm going to fight." "Exactly. If you scream, if you threaten to sue, if you give them any indication that you're not broken, they'll circle the wagons, they'll delay, they'll hide the assets, they'll move the money offshore before we can freeze it." She looked at me intensely. "They'll only sign that waiver if they feel safe, if they think you're defeated, if they're laughing at you." I thought about the funeral, about James's smirk when he'd offered me $5,000, about Victoria's cold smile, about Ashley's pitying look. "That's the condition Robert told you to wait for," I said. "The laughter." "Yes." He didn't mean it poetically, Emma. He meant the specific moment of hubris when they think they've gotten away with it. When they look at you holding your $1 and they smile, that's when they'll sign. That's when they'll seal their own fate. Elizabeth closed the tablet. "And that's when you answer my question. The question about the key. Yes. I'll ask if you possess the key to Safety Deposit Box 91. You'll say yes. I'll ask if you consent to activate the sealed codicil. You'll say yes. And then Agent Miller will send his text, and the doors will close, and it will be over." I let out a long breath. "And if I hesitate? If I show any doubt? Then they'll know something is wrong. They'll refuse to sign. They'll demand an audit. They'll tie this up in court for years, and by the time it's resolved, the evidence will be buried, the witnesses will be silenced, and the money will be gone." Elizabeth stepped closer. "You have to be perfect, Emma. You have to be the victim they expect. Can you do that?" I thought about the last 15 years. The double shifts at the diner, the student loans, the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because I couldn't afford both food and rent, the family gatherings I'd seen on social media while I'd sat alone in my apartment. I thought about Robert's letter. The cold preserves things. It makes them hard. It makes them sharp. "I can do it," I said. "Good." Elizabeth opened the door. "Then let's go to war." We walked down the hall toward Conference Room A. Through the glass walls, I could see them already gathered. James at the head of the table, Victoria to his right, Ashley to his left. 2 corporate lawyers flanked James, organizing stacks of documents with mechanical efficiency, and in the corner, sitting slightly back from the table in a chair near the window, was a man in a gray, off-the-rack suit. He had a notepad on his knee and a cheap ballpoint pen in his hand. Special Agent Miller. James and Victoria hadn't even looked at him twice. To them, he was furniture. To me, he was the executioner. Elizabeth pushed open the door. All eyes turned to us. "Ah, Elizabeth," James said, his voice booming with false warmth. "And Emma. Good. We're all here. Let's get this over with, shall we? We have a lunch reservation at 1. "You might want to cancel that," Elizabeth said, her voice flat. James's smile flickered. Excuse me. Elizabeth didn't answer. She walked to the head of the table, the empty spot opposite James, and placed her leather portfolio down with a heavy thud. I am Elizabeth Carter, court-appointed executor of the estate of Robert Hayes, she announced, and this proceeding is now in session. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Now wait a minute, one of the corporate lawyers began. We weren't informed that— You were informed in the official notice of probate filing, Elizabeth cut him off, which was sent to your office 3 weeks ago. If you didn't read it, that's not my problem. She opened the portfolio. We will proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Robert Hayes, dated November 15th of this year. Following the reading, there will be an opportunity for questions and the execution of necessary waivers. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each person. I should note for the record that this proceeding is being observed by a representative of the probate court as required by Pennsylvania estate law. She gestured vaguely toward Agent Miller in the corner. James glanced at him and shrugged. Victoria didn't even look. I sat down in a chair in the middle of the table, away from both ends. I put my bag on the floor and wrapped the strap around my ankle. Would you like some water, Emma? Ashley asked. Her voice was thin, tremulous. I brought bottles for everyone. I'm fine, I said. Elizabeth began to read. To my granddaughter, Ashley Hayes, I leave the sum of $1 million in cash to be distributed immediately from the liquid assets of the estate, provided she signs the standard waiver of contest and estate certification. Ashley let out a breath that sounded like a sob, but I could see it was relief. She covered her mouth with her hand. Oh, thank you, Grandpa, thank you. It's a generous gift, James said, nodding. Very generous. Go ahead, sweetie, sign the paper so we can move forward. One of the corporate lawyers slid a document toward Ashley. Just here, Ms. Hayes. It's a simple acknowledgement of receipt. Ashley didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen and signed with a flourish, not bothering to read the text. The scratch of pen on paper sounded like a death rattle. I watched the ink dry. She'd just signed her own confession. Elizabeth continued. To my daughter Victoria and her husband James, I leave the remainder of the estate's real property, the family residence, and operational control of the Hayes Family Foundation, subject to the standard transfer protocols and Cayman account structures currently on file. James smiled broadly. He actually clapped his hands together once. Excellent. Clean and simple, just as we discussed with the firm. Victoria let out a long sigh, her shoulders dropping. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm so glad Robert saw reason at the end. We were worried he might do something erratic. We're not finished, Elizabeth said sharply. She turned the page. The paper crinkled in the silence. To my granddaughter, Emma Hayes, I leave the sum of $1. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then James snorted. It started as a chuckle in his chest and erupted into a full laugh. He slapped the table. $1! I told you! I told you it would be enough for a cup of coffee! Victoria put a hand over her mouth, but her eyes were dancing with malice. Ashley shook her head, looking at me with exaggerated pity. I'm so sorry, Ashley said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. That's just harsh. The corporate lawyers smiled behind their hands. Elizabeth raised her voice, cutting through their amusement. Attached to this bequest is a note from the testator. She read, She knows why. The laughter didn't stop, but it changed, became crueler, sharper. James leaned toward me across the table, his face flushed with triumph. Did you hear that, Emma? She knows why. Because you abandoned him. Because you're ungrateful. Because you're worth exactly $1. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Elizabeth. I waited. My hand moved slowly to the inside of my jacket. I felt the cold brass of the key. I felt the sharp corner of the USB drive. This was it. This was the moment Robert had orchestrated. Elizabeth didn't close the portfolio. She stared at me, her expression shifting from professional detachment to the intensity of a prosecutor closing a trap. Emma, she said. Her voice was no longer reading from a script. It was a direct question. Yes. Do you currently possess the key to safety deposit box number 91 at the First National Bank of Philadelphia? The laughter in the room died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the air. James's smile froze on his face. Victoria turned sharply, her neck snapping around so fast I heard it crack. "What?" James asked. "What box? What are you talking about?" Elizabeth ignored him. She held my gaze, her eyes boring into mine. "And do you consent to activate the sealed codicil of Robert Hayes, effective immediately?" I stood up. My legs felt strong. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key. I held it up so the light from the window caught the metal, making it gleam. "Yes," I said. Victoria's face went the color of old ash. She knew. She understood immediately what sealed codicil meant, the thing Robert had threatened them with for years. "Wait a minute," James stammered, standing up. "You can't. She got $1. The will is read. We're done here." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," Elizabeth said. It wasn't a request. She opened the second section of the portfolio and pulled out a document stamped with red ink. "The bequest of $1 was not an inheritance," Elizabeth announced, her voice ringing off the glass walls. "It was consideration, legal consideration to establish a binding contract." She looked at the corporate lawyers. "By accepting the $1 and possessing the key, Emma Hayes is not a beneficiary of this will. She is the appointed sole trustee of the Hayes Blind Trust, a legal entity established in 2010 and funded continuously for the past 15 years. "Trust!" James shouted. "There's no trust! I've seen the books. I've audited the accounts." "You saw the books Mr. Hayes wanted you to see," Elizabeth said coldly. "The Blind Trust was established through a private attorney with a separate custodian. It exists entirely outside the corporate structure you've been monitoring." She turned to me. "As trustee, Emma, you have the legal authority to freeze all disbursements from this estate, including the $1 million to Ashley Hayes." I looked at Ashley. Her face had gone pale. Wait." "I freeze it," I said. "You also have the authority," Elizabeth continued, "to demand a full forensic audit of the Hayes Family Foundation prior to any transfer of control to James and Victoria Hayes." I met Victoria's eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in them. Real, genuine terror. "I demand the audit," I said. "Immediately. Full scope. All accounts, domestic and foreign." "No!" Victoria screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. "You can't do that. We have a waiver. Ashley signed the waiver." Elizabeth smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Thin, cold, victorious. "Exactly, Mrs. Hayes. She signed it." Elizabeth held up the paper Ashley had scribbled on moments before. "Clause 4, paragraph 2 of the waiver. I'll cite from memory. In the event that a beneficiary accepts a cash payout and signs this release, they automatically consent to a full review of all associated accounts to satisfy federal anti-money laundering regulations under Title 18, Section 1957. Ashley dropped her pen. It clattered on the table. "What? No, I didn't read that." "You never read anything, Ashley," I said quietly. "That's always been your problem." The room seemed to tilt. James looked from the waiver to me, his eyes wide with dawning, horrific realization. "You set us up," he whispered. You set us up." "I didn't," I said. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and placed it on the table. The small black rectangle sat there like a loaded gun. "Robert did. I just turned the key." And then the man in the corner stood up. The stranger in the cheap suit. The man James had called some clerk from probate court. He walked toward the table. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a stamp or a form. He pulled out a gold badge mounted on black leather. "Special Agent Miller," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Department of Justice, Organized Crime Division." Victoria made a sound that wasn't human. a high, thin wail of a woman watching her entire life collapse. Agent Miller looked at his phone. "I've just received a text confirmation," he said. "Based on the activation of the codicil and the signed consent from Ms. Ashley Hayes authorizing a federal review, the sealed package deposited with the DOJ 3 weeks ago has been opened." He looked at James, then at Victoria. "James Hayes. Victoria Hayes. I have a federal warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices in this room. I also have a team coming up in the elevator right now to secure all records of the Hayes Family Foundation relating to wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering." James slumped back into his chair. His legs had given out. All the arrogance, all the bluster, all the confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a small, terrified man. Victoria covered her face with her hands and began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs. But she wasn't crying for Robert. She wasn't crying for her father. She was crying for herself. Ashley sat frozen, staring at her hand, the hand that had signed the paper. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Em," she whispered. "Em, please, we're sisters." I looked at her. I looked at the pearls around her neck, Robert's pearls, the ones she'd claimed she couldn't find this morning. "We share DNA," I said, repeating the words I'd told her on the phone yesterday. "That's all." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a $1 bill. It was crisp, new, fresh from the bank. I walked over to where James was sitting, staring blankly at the table. I placed the dollar bill on the polished walnut surface. Next to it, I placed the brass key to box 91. "You were right, Dad," I said softly. "I was only worth $1. He looked up at me, his eyes wet and red. "But you forgot one thing," I said. I leaned down, so close I could smell the scotch on his breath. "It only costs $1 to buy the truth." Behind me, I heard the conference room doors burst open. Multiple sets of footsteps, voices calling out commands. "James Hayes, place your hands on the table." "Victoria Hayes, step away from the briefcase." "Ashley Hayes, remain in your seat." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the double-glass doors where Elizabeth was standing. She gave me the smallest nod, respect, acknowledgement, maybe even pride. I pushed through the doors and stepped into the quiet hallway. Behind me, the room erupted into chaos. I heard Victoria screaming my name. I heard the corporate lawyers shouting about jurisdiction and improper procedure. I heard Ashley crying. I didn't look back. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The doors slid open immediately, as if they'd been waiting for me. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise, shutting out the family that had never been a family, I saw my reflection in the steel panel. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a glitch in the system. I looked like a Hayes, the only one left standing. The elevator began its descent, carrying me away from the 42nd floor, away from the empire, away from the people who'd thought they could bury me with $1 and a laugh. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. It was a text from Elizabeth. "It's done. The package is open. FBI is executing warrants at the house and the foundation offices. They're going to need you for testimony, but not today. Today, you rest." I typed back, "Thank you." Her response came immediately. "Robert would be proud. Now go live the life he couldn't give you." I put the phone away. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. I walked out into the marble lobby through the revolving doors and out into the gray Philadelphia morning. It was still raining, but this time I didn't mind. I tilted my face up to the sky and let the cold drops hit my skin. I was free. For the first time in 34 years, I was free. I didn't go home. Not to my apartment in Chicago, and certainly not to the Hayes estate. Instead, I checked into a different motel, this one on the outskirts of Philadelphia near the airport, the kind of place where businessmen stayed during layovers and nobody asked questions. I needed to be close. The FBI would want to talk to me, and I needed to be available. But more than that, I needed to see this through to the end. I sat on the edge of the bed and turned on the television. The local news was already running the story. Breaking news out of Center City, Philadelphia, where federal agents have executed warrants at the offices of the Hayes Family Foundation and the private residence of James and Victoria Hayes. Sources tell us this is part of an ongoing investigation into alleged financial crimes. The screen showed footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of the foundation offices. Then it cut to the Hayes estate, my childhood home, with its wrought iron gates and manicured lawns. More agents, more boxes, a perp walk. James and Victoria being escorted to separate vehicles, their hands cuffed behind their backs. James's face was pale, his expression shell-shocked. Victoria kept her head down, hiding from the cameras, but I could see her shoulders shaking. Ashley wasn't shown. According to the news crawler at the bottom of the screen, she was being held for questioning but hadn't been formally charged yet. My phone rang. Elizabeth. "Are you watching?" she asked. "Yes." "How do you feel?" I thought about the question. How did I feel? Triumphant? Vindicated? Relieved? "Empty," I said honestly. I thought I'd feel something more, but I just feel empty. "That's normal," Elizabeth said. "Revenge isn't what people think it is. It's not cathartic. It's just done. The feeling comes later when you realize you can finally move forward. When does that happen? Different for everyone. For some people, tomorrow. For others, years from now." She paused. "The FBI wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the field office. They'll need your testimony about what you found in the box, what Robert told you, everything." "I'll be there." "Good. And Emma, you should prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. Victoria's lawyers are already spinning a narrative. She's the victim of an abusive marriage. James controlled everything. She didn't know the extent of the fraud." "She was the architect," I said, my voice hard. "The evidence proves it." "I know, and that evidence will hold up in court. But the media circus, the public opinion, that's a different battlefield. Your family has connections. They have money for lawyers, PR firms, crisis managers. They're going to fight." "Let them fight," I said. "I have the truth." After I hung up, I opened my laptop. I needed to see the full scope of what had been unleashed. I logged into the secure server where I'd uploaded Project Icarus. The dead drop timer showed it had been automatically canceled. I'd logged in within the 12-hour window, so the files hadn't been released to the press. But I didn't need to release them anymore. The FBI had everything. I pulled up the news websites. The story was everywhere now. Philadelphia Inquirer. Hayes Family Foundation under federal investigation for fraud. Wall Street Journal. Billionaire's heirs arrested in charity scheme. New York Times. From philanthropy to prison, the fall of the Hayes dynasty. The comment sections were brutal. People who'd attended the charity galas, who'd posed for photos with James and Victoria, who'd praised their generosity, they were all turning on them now. User comment Lurker 87. "I donated to their foundation last year. How much of my money actually went to help people? This is disgusting." User Philly Native. "Classic rich people behavior. Steal from charity, live in a mansion, act like they're better than everyone else. Hope they rot in jail." But there were defenders too, people who didn't want to believe it. User Mainline. Resident. "I've known Victoria Hayes for 20 years. She's a good woman. This has to be a misunderstanding. That daughter of theirs, Emma, she's always been troubled. I heard she had drug problems. Maybe she's the one who set them up." I closed the laptop. I didn't need to read anymore. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The popcorn texture blurred as my eyes unfocused. I thought about Robert, about that last phone call, his voice raspy and desperate, about the diner, the way his hands had shaken as he'd pushed the key across the table. He'd known he was dying. He'd known he didn't have the strength to see this through himself. So he'd built a trap that would spring after his death when he couldn't be hurt anymore. He'd made me the trigger. The cold preserves things. It makes them hard. It makes them sharp. I'd spent 15 years in the cold, working double shifts, living in studio apartments with radiators that barely worked, eating ramen and canned soup because it was all I could afford. And all that time, he'd been watching, depositing money into a trust I didn't know existed, building evidence against the people who were supposed to love me, waiting for the right moment to hand me the weapon. I didn't know if I should thank him or hate him, maybe both. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Daniel. Saw the news. Holy shit, Em. You actually did it. I'm proud of you. Also, my lawyer says the FBI wants to talk to me. I'm cooperating fully. Burn in hell, Hayes family. I smiled despite myself. Daniel was safe. That was something. Another text, this one from my boss at Redwood Harbor Forensics. Boss. Emma, I saw the news about your family. I'm sorry you're going through this. Take all the time you need. Also, HR has determined that the photo was indeed a fabrication. We filed a police report against the sender. Your job is secure. Call me when you're ready to talk. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. My career was intact. My reputation was intact. I was still me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 48 hours, I slept. The FBI field office in Philadelphia was a concrete fortress on Arch Street. I arrived at 8:50 in the morning, 10 minutes early, wearing the same clothes I'd worn to the reading yesterday. I hadn't packed enough for an extended stay. Elizabeth met me in the lobby. She handed me a coffee. You look like you need this. I didn't sleep much. Yes, you did, I can tell. You look better than you did yesterday. She guided me toward the elevators. We're meeting with Special Agent Miller and his team. They're going to ask you to walk them through everything. The diner meeting, the contents of Box 91, the documents you found, the phone calls from Victoria and Ashley. I have recordings of the calls. Good, that'll help. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. Emma, I need you to understand something. What you did yesterday, activating the codicil, triggering the FBI investigation, that was the easy part. What comes next is harder. Testifying. Living with it, Elizabeth said. These are your parents, your sister. No matter how terrible they are, no matter what they did to you, they're still family. And when the trial starts, when you have to sit on that stand and answer questions about them, when you have to look them in the eye and say the words that will send them to prison, that's when the guilt hits. I don't feel guilty. You will, Elizabeth said quietly. Everyone does. It's human nature. But you need to remember why you're doing this. Not for revenge, not for the money, but because the truth matters, because justice matters, because if you don't do this, they'll do it to someone else. The elevator opened on the 5th floor. Agent Miller was waiting for us in the hallway. Ms. Hayes, he said, shaking my hand. Thank you for coming in. We have a lot to cover. He led us to a conference room. It was smaller than the one at the law firm, with institutional furniture and fluorescent lights that hummed. 3 other agents were already seated. 2 men and a woman, all in dark suits. Agent Miller gestured for me to sit. We've been going through the materials from Safety Deposit Box 91. The USB drive you provided has been invaluable. We've also executed search warrants on the Hayes Family Foundation, your parents' home, and Ashley Hayes' apartment. What did you find? I asked. Everything, the female agent said. She had short dark hair and sharp eyes. Backup drives, offshore account statements, burner phones with text messages coordinating the wire transfers. Your mother kept meticulous records. She was either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. Arrogant, I said. She thought she'd covered her tracks. Agent Miller opened a folder. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me about your grandfather's phone call. When did he first contact you? I told them everything. The call at 2:47 p.m. on that Tuesday afternoon, the diner meeting, the black SUV that had followed me, the envelope with "She knows why," the key, the funeral, the cameras in Robert's study, the USB drive with the password 2932. I told them about the foundation ledgers I'd analyzed, the shell companies in Delaware, the crypto wallet that paid for James's watch. I told them about Daniel Brooks and the compliance reports that had been suppressed. I showed them the recordings of the phone calls from Victoria and Ashley. They took notes. They asked questions. They asked me to repeat certain details, to clarify timelines, to describe exactly what Robert had said in the diner. It took 4 hours. When we finally finished, Agent Miller leaned back in his chair. Ms. Hayes, I want to be straight with you. This is one of the most well-documented fraud cases I've seen in my career. Your grandfather spent years building this evidence. And what you've added, the recordings, the blockchain analysis, the metadata from the documents, it's airtight. So they're going to prison? James and Victoria? Almost certainly. The charges are extensive. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization. We're talking decades, not years. And Ashley? The female agent spoke up. That's more complicated. She benefited from the fraud, and she signed authorizations for some of the transfers. But there's evidence that suggests she didn't understand what she was signing. Her lawyers are already arguing diminished capacity, that she was manipulated by her parents, that she's essentially a victim. Is she? I asked. That's for a jury to decide, Agent Miller said. But between you and me, she's probably looking at a suspended sentence and community service if she cooperates fully. She's already started talking, giving us details about how Victoria operated, about meetings she overheard, about documents she was told to sign. I thought about Ashley in the conference room yesterday, staring at her hand, the hand that had signed the waiver. She called me before the reading, I said. She warned me. She said if the key came out, we all go down. She knew something was wrong. But she didn't stop it, Elizabeth said quietly. She didn't blow the whistle. She just took the money and hoped no one would notice. Agent Miller closed his folder. We'll need you to testify at trial. Probably multiple times, once for James, once for Victoria, possibly for Ashley, if her case goes to trial instead of a plea deal. When? Probably not until next year. These cases take time to prepare. But in the meantime, you should know, your parents' lawyers are going to come after you. They're going to try to paint you as a disgruntled daughter with an axe to grind. They're going to bring up the fact that you haven't spoken to your family in years. They're going to try to discredit your testimony. Let them try, I said. I have the evidence. I have Robert's files. I have the recordings. I have the truth. Agent Miller smiled, a rare expression on his otherwise stoic face. Yes, you do. And that's why you're going to win. 3 days later, I was back in Chicago, but I didn't go to work. I took Elizabeth's advice and requested a leave of absence. My apartment felt strange. Too quiet. Too clean. Too small. I'd lived here for 6 years, but it had never felt like home. It was just a place to sleep between shifts at the office, a way station between the life I'd left behind and the life I was trying to build. Now, sitting on my couch with a cup of coffee, I realized I didn't have to stay here. I had $42 million in a trust fund. I could go anywhere, do anything, but I didn't know what I wanted. I opened my laptop and checked the news. The Hayes case was still dominating the headlines. CNN, new details emerge in Hayes. Foundation scandal, $15 million laundered over 10 years. Forbes, how Robert Hayes built a trap for his own children. MSNBC, the whistleblower granddaughter, Emma Hayes speaks out. I clicked on the MSNBC article. I hadn't spoken to any reporters. I'd refused all interview requests. But someone had leaked details of my story. The article described my childhood, my estrangement from the family, my career as a forensic accountant. It painted me as the hero, the brave granddaughter who'd brought down a corrupt empire. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Emma Hayes? A woman's voice, professional. Speaking. My name is Sarah Brennan. I'm a producer at 60 Minutes. I know you've been declining interview requests, but I wanted to reach out personally. We're doing a segment on white-collar crime and accountability, and your story is exactly the kind of thing we cover. We'd love to have you on the show. I'm not interested in being on television. I understand, but think about it. Your story could help other people in similar situations. People who've been cut off from their families. People who suspect financial abuse but don't know what to do about it. You could be an advocate. I thought about Daniel, who'd risked his career to help me. I thought about Robert, who'd spent his final weeks building evidence because he was too afraid to speak up earlier. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. Here's my number. Call me if you change your mind. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. An advocate. Was that what I wanted to be? I thought about the Hayes Family Foundation. It had been dissolved, its assets frozen pending the criminal trial. But eventually, those assets would be redistributed. The legitimate charities that had received grants would be made whole, the stolen money would be recovered, and the trust, the Hayes blind trust that Robert had created for me, that was mine, free and clear. The FBI had confirmed it was funded entirely from Robert's personal investments, not from the foundation. $42 million. I could buy a house, a nice house, not a mansion. Somewhere quiet, maybe near water. I could quit my job, or maybe I'd keep working. I liked the work, actually. I liked finding patterns, solving puzzles, uncovering the truth. Or I could start something new. A nonprofit, maybe. A fund for whistleblowers, people who exposed fraud but lost their jobs in the process. People like Daniel. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. The Robert Hayes Whistleblower Protection Fund mission, to provide financial, legal, and emotional support to individuals who expose corporate fraud, corruption, and financial crimes. Services: legal defense funds for wrongful termination cases, career counseling and job placement assistance, mental health support, housing assistance during legal proceedings, anonymous tip line for reporting suspected fraud. I stared at the words. It felt right. It felt like justice. Robert had spent his life building wealth. I would spend mine protecting the people who told the truth about how that wealth was made. I saved the document. Then I picked up my phone and called Elizabeth. "I want to use the trust fund," I said when she answered. "Not all of it, but $5 million. I want to start a foundation." "What kind of foundation?" I told her my idea. There was a long pause. Then Elizabeth said, "Robert would have hated that." "I know." "Good," Elizabeth said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Then it's perfect." The courthouse in downtown Philadelphia was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled, and there were reporters standing in the back, their cameras trained on the defense table. James Hayes sat next to his lawyer, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He'd been denied bail after the prosecution argued he was a flight risk. He looked 20 years older than he had at the funeral, his hair grayer, his face gaunt, his shoulders slumped. Victoria sat at a separate table with her own legal team. She'd been granted bail, $2 million, which she'd paid by liquidating some of her personal jewelry. She was wearing a simple black suit and no makeup, playing the part of the repentant defendant. Ashley wasn't here. She'd taken a plea deal 2 months ago. 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of the $1.2 million she'd received from the foundation. In exchange, she'd testified against James and Victoria. I sat in the front row of the gallery next to Elizabeth. Daniel Brooks sat on my other side. He'd been hired by the FBI as a consultant on financial crimes, a job that paid twice what he'd made at the bank. "All rise," the bailiff called. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Whitmore presiding." The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She'd presided over dozens of white-collar crime cases. She'd seen everything. "Please be seated," she said. "We're here for sentencing in the case of United States versus James Hayes and United States versus Victoria Hayes. Will the defendants please rise?" James and Victoria stood. James wobbled slightly. Victoria kept her head high. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Whitmore said, looking at James, "you have been found guilty on 17 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of tax evasion, 12 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to make a statement?" James's lawyer whispered something to him. James shook his head. "No, Your Honor," the lawyer said. "Very well." Judge Whitmore opened a folder. "Mr. Hayes, your crimes were not crimes of passion or desperation. They were crimes of greed. You stole from a charitable foundation that was meant to help people, children who needed education, communities that needed art programs, families who needed support. You stole that money to fund a lifestyle of luxury. You stole it while your own daughter was working 2 jobs to pay for college." I felt Elizabeth's hand squeeze mine. "The sentencing guidelines recommend 15 to 20 years, Judge Whitmore continued. "But given the scope of your crimes, the premeditation involved, and your complete lack of remorse, I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $8.3 million. James's knees buckled. His lawyer caught him. There was a murmur in the gallery. Someone behind me whispered, "Jesus Christ!" "What?" Judge Whitmore turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Hayes, please rise." Victoria stood. Her mask finally slipped. Tears ran down her face. "Mrs. Hayes, you have been found guilty on 19 counts of wire fraud, 10 counts of tax evasion, 15 counts of money laundering, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. Do you wish to make a statement?" Victoria's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." "Proceed." Victoria turned toward the gallery, toward me. "Emma," she said, her voice cracking, "I'm so sorry. I know you'll never forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. I was afraid. I grew up with nothing, and I was so afraid of going back to nothing, and I made terrible choices. I chose money over family. I chose security over honesty. I destroyed everything." She wiped her eyes. "Your grandfather was right about me. I was hungry. I was so hungry for the life I thought I deserved that I forgot to be the person who deserved it." She turned back to the judge. "I am guilty, Your Honor, of all of it, and I will accept whatever sentence you give me." Judge Whitmore's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Hayes, your crimes were more extensive than your husband's. The evidence shows that you were the primary architect of this fraud. You set up the shell companies. You coordinated the wire transfers. You suppressed the bank compliance reports. And when you were confronted with the possibility of exposure, you attempted to have your own daughter declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized." Victoria's lawyer started to object, but Judge Whitmore held up a hand. "I have read the testimony. I have reviewed the recordings. I have seen the evidence. Mrs. Hayes, you are not a victim. You are a predator, and the court will treat you as such." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I am sentencing you to 30 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution in the amount of $10.7 million. You will also forfeit all assets acquired through the commission of these crimes, including the family residence, all vehicles, and all jewelry purchased with foundation funds." Victoria collapsed into her chair. Her lawyer put an arm around her shoulders, but she shook him off. "This court is adjourned," Judge Whitmore said, banging her gavel. The bailiffs moved forward to take James and Victoria into custody. James went quietly, shuffling toward the door like a ghost. Victoria had to be helped to her feet. As she passed my row, she looked at me one last time. I didn't look away. I met her eyes and held them. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then she closed it and turned away. I watched her disappear through the door that led to the holding cells. 25 years for James, 30 years for Victoria. They'd both be in their 90s when they got out, if they lived that long. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Cameras flashed as Elizabeth and I walked down the steps. "Miss Hayes? Miss Hayes? How do you feel about the verdict? Do you have any regrets? What will you do with your inheritance? Will you reconcile with your sister?" I stopped at the bottom of the steps. Elizabeth had advised me not to speak to the press, but I had something I needed to say. I turned to face the cameras. My grandfather, Robert Hayes, spent his entire life building an empire. He was brilliant, he was ruthless, he was successful, but he was also a coward. When he discovered that his own children were stealing from a charity he'd founded, he did nothing. He chose the company over the truth. He chose his legacy over justice. I paused, letting the words settle. But he also did something else. He built a trap. He spent the last years of his life gathering evidence, creating legal mechanisms, and preparing for this day. He couldn't bring himself to expose them while he was alive, but he made sure the truth would come out after he was gone. I looked directly at the camera. If you're watching this and you know about fraud happening at your company, at your charity, in your family, speak up. Don't wait. Don't be like my grandfather. Don't spend your last days regretting your silence, because the truth always comes out eventually. And when it does, the question isn't whether you'll face consequences. It's whether you'll face them with integrity or with regret. I turned and walked toward the car Elizabeth had waiting. The reporters shouted more questions, but I didn't answer. Daniel caught up with me. That was a hell of a speech. It needed to be said. What now? He asked. Now? I looked back at the courthouse, at the granite columns and the words carved above the entrance, equal justice under law. Now I go back to work, I said. I have a foundation to build, and there are a lot of people out there who need help telling the truth. Elizabeth joined us at the car. Robert would have hated that speech. I know, I said. Good, she replied. Then you said exactly the right thing. I didn't keep the $42 million. I used $5 million to start the Robert Hayes Whistleblower Protection Fund. Another $5 million went to the legitimate charities that had been harmed by the foundation's fraud. $10 million went into a trust for Ashley, because despite everything, she was still my sister, and she deserved a chance to rebuild her life. The remaining $22 million went into investments that would fund the foundation's operations for decades. I went back to my job at Redwood Harbor Forensics. I liked the work. I was good at it. And now, every time I uncovered fraud, every time I traced a wire transfer to a shell company, every time I found the lie hiding in the numbers, I knew I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. 6 months after the sentencing, I got a letter. It was from Victoria, written on prison stationery. Emma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to write back. I just wanted you to know that I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, about who I was, about who I became. You were right about me. I was hungry, but it wasn't hunger for food or security. It was hunger for power, for control, for the feeling that I mattered. I grew up invisible, the daughter of a factory worker, the girl who cleaned houses to pay for college. When I married your father, when I became part of the Hayes family, I finally felt like I was somebody. And I was so terrified of losing that feeling that I became a monster. Your grandfather saw it before I did. He knew what I was capable of. And he was afraid of me. That's why he couldn't stop me while he was alive. He knew I would destroy him. But you weren't afraid of me. You came back. You faced me. You finished what he started. I destroyed my family. I destroyed your childhood. I destroyed everything I claimed to love. And I will spend the rest of my life in here knowing that. But you survived. You became the person I could never be. Someone who cares about truth more than comfort. Someone who does the right thing even when it's hard. Your grandfather was wrong about one thing. He thought the cold made you hard and sharp. But I think it made you something else. It made you strong. It made you whole. I'm sorry, Emma, for all of it. Victoria. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it up and put it in a drawer. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. 1 year after the sentencing, I stood in front of a room full of people at the National Whistleblower Conference in Washington, D.C. I was giving the keynote speech. I looked out at the audience. There were accountants and lawyers and compliance officers. There were engineers and scientists and government employees. There were people who'd lost their jobs, their savings, their reputations for telling the truth. My name is Emma Hayes, I said, and I'm here to tell you that your courage matters, that your voice matters, that the truth matters. I told them my story, about Robert and the diner, about the key and the codicil, about the reading and the FBI raid, about the 25 years and the 30 years and the justice that had finally been served. But here's what I want you to remember, I said. Justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens because people like you, people who see something wrong and decide to speak up, make it happen. You are the signal in the noise. You are the one in the binary code. You are the reason the truth survives. I paused, looking at their faces. My grandfather left me $1 in his will. The media called it an insult, but it wasn't. It was a message. It was a reminder that truth doesn't have a price tag. Justice doesn't come in denominations. Sometimes all it takes is one person with $1 worth of courage to bring down an empire built on lies. I held up a dollar bill, the same one I'd placed on the table in front of James during the reading. This is the dollar he left me. And you know what? It's worth more than the $42 million he hid in a trust, because this dollar represents a choice. The choice to stand up. the choice to speak out, the choice to be the person who says no when everyone else is saying yes. I put the dollar back in my pocket. So, if you're struggling with whether to blow the whistle, if you're afraid of what you'll lose, if you're wondering whether it's worth it, I want you to remember this. The truth is always worth it. Always. Because at the end of your life, when you look back, you won't remember the money you made or the job you kept or the comfort you preserved. You'll remember the moment you chose courage over fear. You'll remember the moment you chose truth over silence. I looked out at the audience. Some of them were crying. Some of them were nodding. All of them were listening. "Thank you," I said. "Now go change the world." The room erupted in applause. As I stepped off the stage, I felt my phone buzz. A text from Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, watching the live stream. Robert would have hated that speech, which means you nailed it. Proud of you, Emma." He would be too, even if he'd never admit it. I smiled and put my phone away. I walked out of the conference center and into the bright DC sunshine. My car was waiting to take me to the airport. I had a flight back to Chicago in 2 hours, but I didn't get in the car right away. I stood there on the sidewalk, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, listening to the sounds of the city. I thought about Robert. About the last time I'd seen him in the diner, his hands shaking, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the only one who left. You're the only one who actually knows how to work." He'd been wrong about that. I wasn't the only one. There were thousands of people like me, people who'd been pushed out, cut off, made to feel like mistakes, people who'd survived in the cold and come back stronger. I was just one of them. But I was the one who'd had the key. I pulled out my phone one more time and opened my notes app. I typed a message to myself, something to remember on the hard days. Truth costs $1. Justice takes everything. But at the end, when you look in the mirror, you'll know you were the signal. You were the one. You were real. I saved it. Then I got in the car. "Airport," I told the driver. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the city, at the people walking by, living their lives, making their choices. Somewhere out there, someone was discovering fraud. Someone was finding the lie in the numbers. Someone was making the decision to speak up or stay silent. I hoped they'd choose courage. I hoped they'd remember that sometimes all it takes is $1 and the willingness to turn a key, because that's how empires fall, and that's how truth survives.